Hello and welcome to the 5th installment of my Dungeons and Dragons game diary series, where I recap the events of my personal, heavily homebrewed Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition campaign, where I talk a little bit about any homebrew we used in the game, I discuss future plans for the game, and I just talk about any kind of lessons I learned from the game. In this session, things went really well for a while, and then they kinda got all crazy at the end, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Let's just get into the recap first. The game picks up immediately where it left off last time, with Taliesin alone with Rhinos, who is heavily injured, but stabilized within the small room where they fought the gelatinous cube. Immediately stepping into the room are the two new player characters, played by Yann and Mike, the players of the characters who died last time. I talked a little bit about the little establishment of them in the last one. Quick summary: Yann is playing a grave cleric named Gabriel, who is a follower of the funeral god Thone, who we talked about. While doing a pilgrimage, he found the cemetery where the necromancer fight happened. Seeing the state of which the bodies were left, and the fact that the necromancer's spellbook was stolen or missing, he immediately suspected that it was a rival necromancer or some other kind of ne'er-do-well who took the spellbook. And that is dangerous because now there is another necromancer who has been just killing other ones, so it's not a good situation. And he is traveling with a ranger who is played by Mike. He's gonna take Gloomstalker if he lives the 3rd level, but the ranger's name is Brogan. The rough backstory is that he is a kind of monster hunter / bounty hunter who specializes in tracking orcs, and Gabriel decided to follow him around and travel with him because he is a very danger-prone individual who gets himself into trouble. So Gabriel wants to be there for when he dies to give him a proper funeral because he knows people like this don't really get that. But those two enter the room, and after a brief introduction, Gabriel uses Cure Wounds to bring Rhinos back up to full, as the Grave Cleric gets to do max healing on someone when they're at 0 HP. And he and Brogan loot the previous bodies to get all the valuable stuff, and then they also move the bodies towards the entrance of the sewer so that once they finish whatever they were here to do, they could bury those bodies properly. There is a moment where Bo has Taliesin say something about if he's able to cast magic or not, or if he knows magic, which is immediately followed by, you just saw him do a healing spell. If someone does magic, you could see it. It's loud and bombastic, and it's visible and it's big. There's no real subtle magic in this setting. As the party goes through the tunnel where Rhinos went in the last session, they see it leads straight up, and they have a whole plan of stacking each other on top of each other to kind of climb up. Issue being that from the ceiling to the ground is 10 feet, and then the tunnel going straight up, the little tube, is 15 feet, so they're not going to be able to stack 25 feet up. And with how low all of their strength scores are, it's just not reasonable. Now, one option they had was just leaving and coming back with a ladder or a grappling hook or something like that. Instead, they have a whole back and forth, and it eventually ends with Mike's ranger, Brogan, tying some rope to an arrow and shooting it up. The first time he tries it, it doesn't do too well. Rhinos rolls very, very poorly on a climbing roll, and he just kind of swings around for a bit before it falls. That arrow was broken, but they retrieve the rope, and Mike does it again, actually getting the stick in the wall, and then rolls extremely well on an athletics check to climb it. The other people roll poorly, so it just takes about an hour for them to get up there. As the party climbs, they find themselves in a tunnel. On one end, there is a corridor that slowly slopes up, and to the other end there is several bars that prevent them from going that way. Taliesin is small enough that she can squeeze through, and she does. As she moves forward a bit, she sees in the distance what appears to be some sort of skeleton just standing there. She tells the party, but they're not really in a position to do anything because they can't get past the bars, so she throws a rock at it. It hits the skeleton in the skull, and it kind of jolts back and begins slowly floating towards her like some sort of specter. She begins to panic and tries to squeeze back to the bars. She can at first, but she does eventually get through. This is when initiative is rolled, with Brogan going first. On his turn, he begins prying at the bars with his crowbar and manages to break them so the rest of the party can go through. Rhinos makes a perception check and notices that how the skeleton moves is as if it is suspended in fluid, and quickly deduces that this is a second gelatinous cube. With his experience from the last one, he is not eager to approach. Gabriel advances and casts Guiding Bolt on the gelatinous cube, doing some radiant damage to it. Taliesin attempts to cast Sanctuary on Gabriel, but fails in the casting. Brogan advances and lights a torch, followed by Rhinos attempting to set one of his arrows on fire to attack it from range. The cube begins to slowly advance further. Gabriel casts a second Guiding Bolt, immediately followed by Taliesin once again trying and failing to cast Sanctuary on Gabriel. Brogan throws his torch not at but in front of the gelatinous cube. Rhinos shoots at the gelatinous cube with his fire arrow. The arrow does no damage, but the fire does do some damage. The gelatinous cube tries to nudge at the torch with its pseudopods and attempt to snuff it out, but it cannot, and it wastes its turn as it does not want to advance where there is fire because that would damage it. Finally, Gabriel delivers the killing blow by successfully casting Guiding Bolt for a third time consecutively, and causes the gelatinous cube to die and the skeleton to collapse to the ground. When the fight is over and the coast is clear, they investigate the skeleton, and Brogan decides to gather up some of the acid from the gelatinous cube. He doesn't have a container at the moment, with the exception of the liquor decanter that was on the possession of Ronnie. He quickly downs it and then uses that as a container, so he has an acid vial. A very expensive acid vial because that was a treasure item, but an acid vial nonetheless, which he's holding on to. And I didn't want to give some big negative downside for drinking an entire bottle of alcohol. I don't really have any rules for inebriation because I didn't think it was going to come up. But what I settled on was that he would crit fail on a 3 or lower instead of a 1. Basically a 10% increase in critical failure chance, which is kind of harsh, but he also could have just dumped it out. And he doesn't actually roll a 3 or lower in this session, and by the time he would have sobered up, so it was just a non-issue anyway. And I actually do like abilities or potions or items or whatever that increase the chance of critical failures, as well as increase the chances of critical success. That's why I like a lot of the fighter abilities, because they involve things like getting crits more often, which is just cool to have. Because crits always feel satisfying. Unless you're the DM and someone crit fails or death saves, in which case you feel bad about it. Or an enemy makes a critical attack and it outright kills somebody, or it does a lot of damage and they're downed. It doesn't feel that good. But when players get the crit, it's pretty cool. Even against the monsters I make, it's still fine, because that's what they're there for. They're supposed to be fought and killed eventually. Instead of going past the bars, which they broke down, they decide to go to the right and follow a little bit upward. If they did go past the bars, it would have eventually led to something involving the Earl's whole side plot thing, but they go to the right and find themselves in a chamber that looks like this. I'm putting it up on the screen now. And past the bars, there is this big cloth tarp that is hanging down, and worried it's a trap, they kind of stand off to the side and use the 10-foot pole, which I feel like I forgot to mention. Gabriel has a 10-foot pole. Yann gave up one item for another item. I think it was like the bear trap as part of like his background. He gave that up in exchange for a 10-foot pole, which, I mean, both would be very useful in a number of situations, but the 10-foot pole is more useful for the immediate situation because they help disarm a trap with it. I believe Taliesin takes it and then just kind of runs it along the length of the cloth and basically feels out that there is a wire. And the party, who firmly believes that fire is an effective solution to all their problems because, well, it actually is. A lot of the monsters in this setting need to be killed with fire. They need to have their bodies chopped up and incinerated and scattered, because I just like monsters that are very, very resilient. And yeah, you could kill them now, but they'll come back unless you deal with them permanently. These aren't like organic things. Well, some of them are. Like the gelatinous cube is like a thing that exists within nature in this setting, but the more mystical monsters are things that were created with magic. And yeah, you can't just kill them easily. You gotta banish them. You gotta deconstruct them. You gotta do a bunch of special things to make sure they don't come back. And burning things is just a very effective way of doing that. And so they set the tarp on fire, and it burns through, and it burns up the wires. And when it falls down and burns, and they put it out, they see that behind it was a skeleton, an inanimate skeleton, just a dead body, with some torn up leather armor sitting on a chest. And it has a light crossbow propped up, and a wire connecting the trigger to the wall with a loop, and it connects back to the tarp. So if you pull the tarp down really quickly or you moved off to the side, it would have caused the arrow to shoot at you. But they avoided that by being, I don't want to say smart, but paranoid and dead set on setting things on fire. Inside the chest, there is 6,000 silver. The chest is marked with the Merchants Guild logo. Obviously, this was a bandit or a thief who stole money from the Merchants Guild, got injured in the process, and then just sat here and waited to die with his treasure. Basically trying to screw over who wanted to take it from him one last time. Very pirate-esque. They don't want to leave this treasure right here, but they can't exactly carry all of it. So what they do is begin to carry it back to the tunnel that goes straight down, and they just leave it back there for now. They're hoping nobody's going to come and get it, and no one does, but something does happen to the treasure, which we'll get to in a bit. They go back to that junction where they found the loot, and then go towards the left, and they decide to tie one of their torches to the 10-foot pole so they could light up in front of them further. And they do, and they go for a little bit until they hear some weird talking, and they stop. Taliesin goes ahead to check it out. There, she sees in an opening room, there's like a little bit of an alchemy lab set up, and there is a hag standing above a cauldron, muttering to herself, cackling, laughing. Being a hag is, being all creepy and weird. And Taliesin doubles back, talks to the group, says, hey, there's some crazy witch lady doing a concoction. What are we gonna do? And the party just says, we're just gonna go and kill her. So they go and march forward, and this is where the hag fight begins, which you will see go down in this animation, like the slime fight one, both the slime fights, which is part of the reason why these videos are taking forever, and they're probably going to become bi-weekly, because I really like doing the animations, but they take forever, and it just doesn't work well with my work schedule. Anyway, here's how that fight goes down. Initiative is rolled, with Taliesin going first. She throws a rock as always and misses. Gabriel then advances and casts Guiding Bolt. The hag disappears in a puff of smoke. It is some sort of illusion which she has destroyed. Rhinos then runs up to where the hag was last seen and stabs in the air, hoping to hit it. Unfortunately, he gets caught in a magical snare, but it does not last long as he makes the dex save to end the effect at the end of his turn. The hag then drops down from the ceiling and attacks Gabriel. It slashes at him, doing some damage, and he must make a constitution save to avoid being poisoned, because it is a hag from the sewer, and he fails the con save. Brogan then moves up to the hag and stabs it with Ronnie's rapier, which he has claimed for himself. For the first time in the entire campaign, Taliesin successfully casts a leveled spell. She casts Sanctuary on Gabriel, so he will be protected from being attacked until he attacks the hag first. While protected with Sanctuary, Gabriel casts Cure Wounds on himself. The casting is successful, but he does roll minimum healing. He also fails to make the con save to end the poison condition on himself. Rhinos tries to identify the contents of the cauldron, but doesn't get anything more than its gross magic nonsense. He then rushes over to the hag and tries to slash at it with his short sword. That misses. He then tries to punch at it, and that also misses. The hag begins doing a little dance to kind of mess with the party psychologically, and then vanishes using its invisible passage. Brogan begins swinging his sword wildly, hoping of hitting something, but he doesn't. He then steps out of the water, followed by Taliesin casting Blade Ward and then moving past Brogan to get out of the water as well. Gabriel checks ceiling to see if the hag is there. It is not, so he heals himself again with Cure Wounds. Rhinos goes over to the cauldron to try to push it over, but he rolls really badly on his strength check and just kind of stands there for a moment. The hag rushes over to Rhinos to stop him from pushing the cauldron over, but it misses its attack against him. Brogan runs up and stabs the hag again. Taliesin then tries to throw another rock, and it misses again. And Gabriel tries and fails to cast Inflict Wounds on the hag, which ends the Sanctuary spell. He does not pass the Constitution save to end the poisoned condition. The hag is finally killed when Rhino stabs at it with his short sword, followed by him repeatedly bludgeoning it to death with his bare hands. Wow, what a cool animation. I can't wait to make 2 more of them. Yeah, this video is going very long in the editing process. I just finished running the 6th game, so that's going to be included in this video. Because we're moving bi-weekly, might as well do it now. I was going to originally just have this one come out and then have the other 2 be part of their other ones, but this game and the one I just ran wrap into each other a lot better than the one I just ran in what will probably be the next game. So, longer video, longer wait period, let's move on. The party tips over the cauldron, dumping it into the sewers, which leads out to the ocean, destroying it. There is no serious repercussions for this, even though there probably could have been, but it's destroyed, and the party's going to have enough consequences for their actions later on. We'll get to that. While investigating the immediate area, Taliesin finds a diary that she cannot read, which seems to detail some information about the alchemy set up here. She begins disassembling some and scavenging parts from it, and with good investigations and intelligence, basically puts together that the alchemy lab here was set up by someone else, and then the hag just moved in. Based on things like the fact that these are very high quality instruments, and the hag has just been kind of breaking them and filling them with shit, so not taking care of them. It's also just not in the hag's MO to use crystal and fine glass. And Rhinos goes to open up the chest in the corner and see what's inside. As he approaches, he fails a dex save, and he is yet again ensnared with the snare spell, but it's out of combat, so he gets out eventually. And opening up the chest, they find numerous puppets. These are connected to the puppet show theater thing that's in the market square. There is a tunnel that leads straight up into it, which will come up later. And this entire side quest, which has quickly become the main quest of this city, is loosely based on Candle Cove. The hag can turn invisible and puts on little puppet shows for all the kiddos who learn horrible life lessons and are traumatized by some horrible monster, and the parents are none the wiser. I don't think they actually end up taking the puppets, but the party does take the alchemy supplies and the diary. With this area thoroughly looted, they decide to not go further into the sewers and instead go back to their treasure and figure out a way of lowering it down the hole. They decide to tie a rope around it and lower it that way, and Yann's character yet again fails and ends up dropping something down a hole. It's like the second time it happened, and the chest smashes, sending silver coins all over the place. The party lowers themselves down, and with some investigation rolls, they find most of the silver. They do lose quite a bit. I believe they go from 6,000 to 5,700. A lot of silver to be missing, but they got most of it, so they were happy enough. They slowly gather it into their personal belongings and the small boxes they got from the hag room and also the one in the gelatinous cube room. And they head back to the tavern with their loot and decide to split up from there. Taliesin stays behind while Gabriel goes to the church and starts doing funeral services for Ronnie and Camille. And he eventually comes back to the tavern. However, Yann himself, the player, has to tap out because it was getting quite late. And I was feeling kind of tired here, but I just kept going, which I should have called it then. It would have probably avoided a bunch of stuff, but we kept going and some things happened. This is around the time that Brogan and Rhinos decide to once again rob the Merchants Guild, this time the Bank of the City. At the middle of the night, they go and march on over to the bank, and while they are on their way there, they run into someone they were looking for quite a while. I was gonna have there be another fight animation, but I'm just so burnt out and I have to do one more. I know for a fact that there's gonna be one more. So I'm just gonna explain what happens. It's very short. We're just gonna get through it because it's important, but it's not as intricate. While making their way to the bank, they run into someone very short, a young girl wearing a hooded cloak of some kind that is coated in frost. This is Armor of Agathis, but that'll come up later. And being players, they recognize this as a threat and probably the killer. As they deduced earlier, the killer was very short. So Rhinos and Brogan start to fight. Brogan casts a spell. This is the first time Mike has actually cast a spell, and he critically fails it. He was attempting to cast Searing Smite, but he crit failed, so instead it was Heat Metal, which was cast on his sword, and he failed the con save, so he dropped his rapier and took a bunch of damage. I think he was on like 1 or 2 HP. Eventually he would make another spell casting check to cast Cure Wounds on himself, and he does. But for now, he's severely injured. Rhinos goes up and punches the girl. She takes some damage. Most of it is blocked by the Armor of Agathis, but she does take like a point of damage. And he takes 5 cold damage because Armor of Agathis, and taking damage magically, he immediately says, okay, screw this, and for his bonus action attack, stabs her with his short sword. Because it is a small child, he kills her almost instantly, stabs her through the stomach, and she is dead. Now, why the monk, whose entire class is built around doing non-lethal bludgeoning damage, decided to stab her. Still trying to figure that out, but the important thing is that they killed a small child. There is some confusion whether or not Taliesin is around because she has the raven that she could watch through, but also it's only up to 100 feet, and they're more than 100 feet away. So what happens is Taliesin shows up and hides the body for them while they go to the bank, but because it doesn't make sense with the range of the raven, it gets retconned into her not knowing what's happening, and Rhinos hiding the body in an alleyway, and they go and rob the bank. And it's not so much as robbing the bank as it is committing a massacre at the bank and then taking some money. They show up and they make some good checks to kind of plan out a route that involves sneaking past guards on routine. And they climb up the pillar to the bank to get to the big stained glass windows at the top. I think one of them makes it up, the other doesn't. I think Brogan gets up there and Rhinos is left behind because he has poor strength. He can't really climb too well. And eventually what happens is Brogan just throws a knife down at the one guard and basically kills him. He goes from like 6 HP to 1, so he's basically dead. I have a little system for massive damage, which I'll talk about in a bit, but that guy's basically dead. He's not in any position to do anything. And then he dies, and they go in there. After opening up the latch and sneaking in, there's a guard by this big vault, and one of them shoots an arrow and kills him. So he's dead, and then they slowly start picking the locks on this big safe, and they grab some bags of money. I think they only grab I think it's like 400 gold in total. I'm not entirely sure. But they grab some money, and more guards show up, and they kill those two. So like 4 guards are dead by now, and they start running, and they're making stealth checks to avoid running into guards, and they're making investigation checks to find places to hide. Brogan goes over to the puppet show box and tries to hide there, where he finds the sewer entrance that was hidden there, and he just climbs down, just kind of stays there on that little level for probably the rest of the night before making his way back to our tavern in the morning, whereas Rhinos just head straight back to the tavern. This is around the point that everyone levels up because of gold they acquired earlier, and Usopp wants to level up Rhinos again, but I say not to because too much of a level difference by now, and that is where we end the session. And now is when I would usually talk about lessons I've learned and future plans and stuff, but as I've talked about in other videos and even in this video, I'm going to make this series bi-weekly, so there's actually another game we have to get through. So I'll just put a few thoughts I have for right now. The first one is that I wasn't really happy with how the heist went down, because what ultimately became of it is that the entire city went into lockdown because the Merchants Guild, a very powerful group of people in this setting, were robbed twice in the same city within 2 weeks of each other. And on top of that, there was multiple murders, so it's not a good situation. And these guys have a habit of destroying planets and cities, and I wanted to kind of avoid that, or at least give adequate consequences, and that's kind of what's gonna happen, kind of. Another thing was, I forgot to mention, the girl that they killed, on her body was a book with various drawings of it, very violent graphic things, kind of things that you'd see in like a creepypasta, like childish drawings of nightmare stuff, which again, it's heavily inspired by Candle Cove, so obviously that would be the case. And Rhinos takes that, and there's also a key that she had. The key led to her house, and basically the girl's story is that her parents died when she was a little bit younger, and because her family had money, she wasn't taken into an orphanage. She was just allowed to live on her own because she had a lot of money to constantly pay for things. She didn't need any charity or handouts because she just inherited everything. And yeah, all of her physical needs were met, but she had nobody. She had no emotional connections. And that's what kind of drove her towards the puppet show, and then later gave her the drive to become a warlock. Someone reached out to her and gave her this power. And it was Coddard, the same patron as Taliesin, the same patron who finds vulnerable people and gives them power so that they destroy themselves, because he's the god of early demise and failure and self-destruction. And if the party went to the house, they would find, first of all, a bunch of treasure stuff, because she is a lot of money. And on top of that, there would be some magic things, some lore stuff about the setting, and kind of hammer in the tragedy of this character and really go towards the theme, which is, as kind of lame as it is, it's hurt people hurt people. If a person is doing something wrong, there's a reason for it. Nobody in the setting is an asshole just to be an asshole, with the exception of things that explicitly aren't human. Orcs are monsters that will kill you and burn your village down and destroy everything you hold dear, because they hate you for no other reason than you're a human and their role in the world is to fight humans. All of these mythical creatures are driven by their natural inclination to be just terrible. But humans aren't. Humans, like in real life, only really do bad things if there is some kind of cause to it. But that kind of went out the window when Rhinos just stabbed the girl. Again, no idea why he is the perfect character to take her out non-lethally, and why he didn't take her to the church immediately and tell the priests what happened and explain everything. I also don't know, but it comes up in the next game. So let's get right into that then. So the game starts a week later. Out of character, Yann has been informed of the ongoings, and it's not a good situation. There seems to be a reoccurring theme of him dipping out for a bit and then coming back and everything is awful. But you just kind of power through it. This is where the confusion around Talison's involvement is resolved. Due to the limitations of her class features, she is actually exonerated with a retcon, which I don't like doing, but there's no way of keeping it consistent without doing a retcon. And there's a whole bunch of back and forth about the situation, about trying to get out of the city, what are they going to do next, what caused all of the martial law to happen, because, it's been a week. A lot of stuff has gone down. Eventually what happens is Rhinos decides to go to the church to tell the priest that he killed the killer. Now, the big issue with that is he killed the killer a week ago and dumped the body in an alleyway, which, in this setting, you don't do. You have to give people proper funerals, especially if they were magic or if they were evil or cursed or whatever, because that thing doesn't just go away. They fought undead that were in the little catacombs of the wine god's dungeon. I even told the players that if they took their time and went to the abandoned fort any later than they did, they would find a zombie just wandering around there because he didn't get a proper funeral. He was killed and thrown into a hole. He wasn't given a proper funeral, so he came back as an undead. But anyway, Rhinos goes to the church and talks to the priest about killing the killer. He gives the wrong address of where the killing happened. And the priest actually tells Gabriel, Yann's character, to talk to Rhinos and figure out more details, find out what exactly happened, who the killer was, why did he take so long to get there, while the priest goes and gets guards. Because even if everything is all square, they're still going to need the guards to, do reports and get an understanding of what happened, because they should be involved in this, and they are, obviously. Rhinos and Gabriel talk, and I don't know if it's ever explicitly stated that it was a girl, like a little girl that got killed, but it is confirmed where the actual killing happened and where the body was hidden. And based on its proximity to the bank, it's one street over and it happened right around that time, it puts him really close to the massacre at the bank, so it's easy to deduce that Rhinos was also responsible for the murder at the bank, or at least partially responsible. Usopp tries to do this Batman thing, where how in the Batman movie, Gordon and Batman are trying to figure out how to get him out of the police station, and he's like, well, you gotta hit me and knock me out, and then that's the whole thing. Well, Rhinos just says, hey, Gabriel, I'm gonna knock you out, and then I'm gonna make a run for it. But he says that he's gonna do it non-lethally, and yeah, you should, but why didn't you do that earlier? This entire situation would have been avoided if you just knocked out the girl non-lethally. Then the priests could do exorcisms, and the girl could, get put in the orphanage, and then you'll get a bunch of money. It's a whole thing. But so initiative is rolled. Rhinos goes first, and you're not fighting a monk hand to hand, one on one. And he just, fury of blows, knocks him out. Followed by Rhinos fleeing the church. The priest and all the other priests in the church basically say, hey, he just assaulted one of our guys, get him. And there's martial law. There are guards everywhere. The army of the city and the county have converged upon the city, and on top of that, the Merchants Guild has a bunch of mercenaries, so the entire streets are just packed with armed guards, so he doesn't get too far. Cutting over to Taliesin and Brogan, they look around for any kind of way of getting out of the city, because the guards and the Merchants Guild mercenaries are stopping everyone who enters or leaves the city and searching them for anything. And they're not going to get all of that money out. They're not going to get the steam engine out. They're not going to get themselves out with all that investigation going on. So they have to leave covertly. While investigating, they hear rumor of a group called the Rat Catchers, and that just sets off the alarm bells in the players' heads. So they go and investigate and find this group. There's more of them in the background, but it's mainly the two guys, a halfling whose name is Felix, and an ogre who I haven't given a name to yet, but he's like the bigger guy. And the little grift they have is that they have a kobold in a cage. Now, in this setting, kobolds aren't really draconic. Kobolds in Cruel World, which is the name of the setting, are basically the Skaven if they were less dangerous and more like Muppet-like. They're goofier, they're chaotic. They're chaotic evil, but they're more so like diet chaotic evil. They're wacky and mischievous, and they cause a lot of problems, and they can be dangerous, but they're not like existentially evil like orcs are. But these guys have one in a cage, and they're doing a whole spiel about how they're trying to raise money to fund efforts to get these things out of the sewers, and the people are buying it, they're giving money. And Brogan is using this opportunity to sow discourse amongst the people against the Earl, and he does a pretty good persuasion check, and people are getting pissed off. I think his idea is to start a kind of revolution, which that might eventually happen, but it's not going to benefit the party, because the party are just a bunch of nobodies. Like, they're not going to take control over an entire county. I'm just going to put the kibosh on that. You're not going to get an entire county under your control at level 1 and level 2. It's not going to happen. But that happens, and Taliesin and Brogan talk to the guys, put together that they're kind of shysters, and say, hey, listen, we obviously know you're doing a bit here. We want out of the city. We want your help. And Felix, who want to kind of make a reoccurring antagonist, says he'll do it for some money. And they leave tomorrow night at 3 in the morning. And if you're not there within 10 minutes, they're leaving without you. And a bit of a spoiler, they don't escape that way. They don't meet Felix again. After meeting the Rat Catchers, Taliesin and Brogan meet up with Gabriel at the church. While there, Taliesin asks what happened, and Gabriel explains that Rhinos killed a kid, hid the body, probably murdered a bunch of people at a bank, and then confessed to it in a very not clever way, and then assaulted him. And Brogan adds in that it was self-defense, the killing of the kid, which immediately set off like, well, how do you know it's self-defense? Were you there? And then he just walks away. So the party all kind of splits apart for a moment. Mike has this idea of finding an alchemist to make like a amnesia potion, but that's like high magic shit, and this setting doesn't have high magic shit. And his plan is basically to go get stagnant water from somewhere and give it to Gabriel that he gets so sick he forgets that he implicated himself. He wanders around, goes to the docks, talks to some mercenary. There's a whole plot I was gonna have where the Merchants Guild brought in a tiefling, which in this setting, tieflings are like very, very dangerous. Like, they're actual demons, people. They're not something that's treated lightly. And there's like a big thing like where the priests and the locals and the guards do not want this thing in their city, but the Merchants Guild and the mercenaries want to use it to kind of use its magic to locate their stuff that was stolen and kill the people responsible. Some really extreme shit, but that plot line doesn't go anywhere, and it's probably not going to go anywhere because the party's probably going to leave the city by next game, and we'll just get to that when we get to that. But he gets this sewer water in a glass. He's just walking around with an open glass of sewer water. And he meets up with Taliesin just to kind of reconjoin the party, because I'm really not digging the party splitting. But they reconvene, and their plan is to bribe the guards to let Rhinos out of jail. Now, a few problems with this is that, for all intents and purposes, and just in reality, Rhinos is a mass murderer. He is a serial killer who has murdered no less than 5 people in the city. And their plan is essentially buy some liquor and give it to the guards and smooth up to them in hopes that they let him out. Not understand that this is basically Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, he's become like a horrible, horrible thing. And just talking to the guards isn't going to get him out. I think Brogan puts the sewer water in some bottles of alcohol that they were going to give to the guards, but they never actually end up drinking it, so it doesn't really do anything. They go there, and with some pretty low checks and attempting to bribe them, it just backfires. They try to bribe the guards. The guard blows a whistle, more guards come in, and he says, well, these people are trying to bribe me to let out that killer who killed my friends, killed my comrades in arms, my brothers in arms are dead because of this guy, and they want me to let him out, and now they want to talk to him, so let's oblige them. Basically putting them under arrest. And a fight breaks out. Brogan manages to kill one of the guards in the kerfuffle. Taliesin casts Sanctuary on herself, but she eventually gets captured. There's like a dozen guards, and they're all making grapple checks. Statistically, they're gonna grab her. Brogan runs out into the streets, but there's more guards in the streets than there are in the barracks, so he has to make a bunch of dex checks to avoid getting caught. But then he remembers, hey, I have a vial of acid. I'm gonna throw it on somebody to make my escape easier or whatever. So he makes a dex check, critically succeeds. So he does like a crazy backflip over some guards to avoid being captured. And he goes to throw the acid vial at them. And he critically fails the attack roll to throw the acid at them. So what actually happens is he does a cool sick backflip and opens the acid vial midair, only for gravity to cause it to go splashing into his face. He takes 10 damage, which is his entire HP pool, and he is basically dead. The guards do stabilize him and throw him in the jail cell, but they do not give him bandages or treat him for medicine, so he just stabilizes with 1 HP a while later. While that is happening, Gabriel opts into helping investigate the girl who was killed and finding her body before something bad happens. He was able to heal himself up in a side room after being knocked unconscious, so he's pretty close to max HP at the moment, and he gets paired up with 2 characters. One is a scribe. Her job is to work at the orphanage and teach the kids how to read and write. She is just there to take notes for him and offer insight into the city if he has any questions for her. The other guy who is there is a retired city guard who joined the church later in life, so he has like some weapons experience, and his main role is to just keep giving the help action on the investigation checks so Yann doesn't accidentally miss any clues. They investigate for a while. He uses cleric abilities and just good checks to find where the body was dumped. It is not there anymore, but there is a pool of blood that has dried over the course of a week, and he slowly follows some trickles of blood trails that lead to the puppet show sewer entrance. And the woman that they're with, the scribe, says that thing is cursed. The kids would always want to go and watch the puppet shows, but when the puppet shows went on, they didn't. The kid just imagined things. Again, like Candle Cove, where the kids were watching static on the TV and they said it was their favorite show when the adults couldn't see anything. And so that's suspicious. And They go down the sewers. The ex-guard guy is carrying a torch for them. When they go down the tunnel, they find themselves in the alchemy lab where they fought the hag, and all of the pieces are falling into place. They move forward and investigate some more, and using his ability to see the undead, he picks up on an undead hiding underneath a table, slowly approaching. It is a young girl curled up in the fetal position. He knows it's undead, and the other guy goes and investigates, putting the torch close to her so he can get a better look. And she turns around, grabs him, and does something, and then he just dies almost instantly. The woman screams and runs away, climbing up the ladder, as the undead slowly rises, making a religion check and looking at how this guy died and what this girl did to him. He realizes that the little girl who was killed by rhinos and not given a proper funeral rose as a wight, an intelligent martial undead that has an attack that indefinitely decreases your hit point total. And if you die to it, you are raised as a zombie under its control 24 hours later. Gabriel is a cleric of Thone, the god of funerals. He absolutely does not want this guy who helped him investigate this girl's death become a zombie. It's against everything he stands for. So he grabs him, the dead body, and begins dragging it, trying to get him out so he could be given a proper funeral and have him avoid coming back as a zombie. And the wight approaches him and makes an attack, and he takes some necrotic damage. He passes the con save, so his maximum HP isn't decreased, but he does take some necrotic damage. And these guys have like 12 HP. So if this thing does 4 damage, that's quite a lot. So he's moving at half speed because he's carrying this guy. He's not built for strength. He's trying to carry this guy. He tries to dash and the opportunity attacks. It's a tough decision that he has to make, but he has to leave the guy behind in order to escape, to warn the priests and the city that there is a wight in the sewers. Camille makes his way back towards the chapel to talk to the priest about the situation with the wight. The priest is thoroughly disturbed, as he should be, because this is an existential threat to everyone in the city. He informs the guards, and some time passes to later in the evening. The priest goes to confront Rhinos and Rogan and Taliesin about what happened, and Gabriel tags along. While there, Taliesin tries to get involved, which is befuddling because she's been given multiple outs but kept putting herself back into the situation, and now she's in prison and probably going to get executed. And the priest just goes to Rhinos and says, I want to know why you did what you did, because actually I want to know. Like I've talked about it before, but I have absolutely no idea why he didn't just knock her out. It's not like she could cast spells while she's unconscious. And even then, there was a week of this girl being dead, and you didn't say, in the meantime, I want to go talk to the church. You should have gone immediately. And other than the self-defense, there isn't really a good explanation. And I don't know exactly how it got to this, but Rhino said that the money he has should be given to the families of the guards who were killed. And the priest asks how much money that is, and it's about 100 gold per family, which the priest replies, do you value human life that little? And Rhino suggests that he be sent into the sewers to fight the thing that he created, and the priest is not going to have any of that, because this isn't the Suicide Squad. This is a society that recognizes that dangerous people shouldn't be let to go screw around and do stuff, because that's exactly what happened that caused this situation. The priest leaves because he has to go prepare the funerals for the men he murdered, and Gabriel and Rhinos converse for a while before Gabriel leaves. In the middle of the night, Rhinos is dragged from his cell by some guards and taken to the what is now a smashed puppet show theater above the sewer entrance where the wight was last spotted. Around them are a angry mob with obviously the wives and sons and daughters of the people he killed, and they throw him down the hole. He makes a dex check to grab onto the ladder so he avoids just completely dying, and they throw a unlit torch after him. Technically, he should have still been mantacled, but I forgot to add that detail, so it doesn't come up. But he gets tossed down there, and he lights a torch, and he has to go and deal with this. And the reason they did that was not to have him deal with it. They just wanted to kill him. He basically got lynched. They wanted to kill him in a extremely horrible way so that he'll be forever tormented as an undead in the sewers. Gabriel, being the only free man, makes an insight check to kind of like realize, oh god, those guards were like really pissed off and they're probably going to do something drastic. So he eventually comes across the sewer entrance where they threw him down, and they put a big rock over the sewer entrance so he couldn't get his way out, which leads to a combat encounter, which I said I was going to animate, but I'm not going to. I might not do animations anymore because they are very taxing and they take a while and they're tedious to do, and I don't have any time to do them right now, so we're just going to talk about what happens. Rhinos is in the sewers while Gabriel is trying to get in. He's making checks to try to get in, but he is behind in the initiative order, so it's going to take him a while to get down here. Rhinos approaches, and the light illuminates the reanimated corpse of the ex-guard turned servant of the church who was assisting Gabriel in his investigation, and further beyond that is the girl who is standing with a longsword. She is rhythmically tapping it against the stone floor of the sewers, looking at him with a cold, empty stare. Rhinos runs up to the zombie and tries to burn it with his torch. He's doing some fire damage, but not a whole lot. I believe the girl at this point says to kill him, obviously to the zombie who will attempt to attack Rhinos, but I don't think he actually gets any hits on him because he just was rolling very poorly. Eventually, Gabriel makes his way down and rolls really well on the checks and damage of a guiding bolt, which does a ton of damage, and eventually fries the zombie. The girl attempts to make a chill touch against Gabriel, but she rolls really poorly. Rhinos runs up to her and tries to grab the sword out of her hand, which he does successfully. It's a opposed strength check, and he takes the sword out of her hand. Once again, begging the question, why didn't you do that last time? When you saw her with a knife and doing magic, why didn't you disarm her and knock her unconscious earlier? I get you're like doing like a makeup thing where you're atoning for your sins, but why didn't you just do it earlier? But none of that matters because Gabriel had used one of his cleric powers to make her vulnerable to the damage of the next attack she takes, and Rhinos having used his turn to disarm her. It is the girl's turn. She attempts to do Drain Life, but she misses, and then Gabriel hits her with a Guiding Bolt, which is a critical success on the spellcasting check. And we ran into a slight issue where the house rules for how spellcasting checks work is that if you crit succeed, it counts as one spell slot higher. But usually with attack rolls, which Guiding Bolt is an attack roll, you would double the damage dice. So which one it would take would depends on how good it is. I might just have it so it's upcast and doubled, but also that again puts too much coolness on the attack spells and not the save spells, so we might just have it so it just upcasts it. But anyway, he rolls really good, gets that crit, and then rolls really high on the dice, and she's vulnerable to it. He completely evaporates this girl. She is reduced to ash. The entire sewer system lights up with light as she is just flashed out of existence. Nothing but a smoldering pile of blessed, sanctified ash. The zombie was completely fried. It still has like the bones and charred skin, but it's not anime anymore. So that's the combat done. Gabriel and Rhinos take the charred body of the assistant to the church to be given a proper burial. The priest tells Gabriel that Rhinos has to go back to jail, and Rhinos goes back to jail. And that is the end of the session. It ends with Gabriel being the only free man, having no real reason to stay in Chandler's Cove, and the other three party members in prison facing execution for their crimes involving multiple murders. And I have a lot of thoughts on the subject, so we'll just go straight into lessons and future plans. So the first lesson is something that I've heard repeatedly and never really put a lot of stock into, and kind of brush it off as being a kind of generic, not very useful, almost cliche piece of advice, which is never split the party. Obviously, I don't think you should never split the party, but I think it's very important that all party members are involved if they're going to be doing something that progresses the loose plot you've assembled, or if their actions are going to have severe consequences for the rest of the party and even the setting. Rhinos and Brogan killing those guards ushered in a temporary period of martial law. Rhinos and Brogan killing that girl would have caused an existential threat to Chandler's Cove if not for Gabriel. So going forward, I'm gonna try to avoid splitting the party as much as possible. If someone says I'm gonna go off and do something, I'm gonna say, well, you could do that after this other person does that or before, and just keep the party together, because it'll just avoid people doing things too crazy or stepping out of alignment, which brings me to my second thing, which is have everyone be in alignments that are cooperative. I tried to justify the introduction of Gabriel and Brogan as Brogan being a danger-prone individual and Gabriel being someone who wants to ensure that danger-prone individuals are taken care of when they inevitably die prematurely, and that worked to get them together, but it didn't really work keeping them together because obviously they didn't end up together. One ended up in a prison cell with acid all over his face, and the other one ended up a small hero to the city. So going forward, I just told everybody, make characters that are at least neutral and don't have them do anything too crazy or evil or destructive, just because I don't want to keep having situations where Yann steps out for a minute and then comes back and everything is fucked. And I guess the third thing would simply to be make hyper-destructive actions be harder to do. Because that bank heist was way too easy. It wasn't even really a heist. They just kind of waltzed in, stabbed some guys, and took some money. There probably should have been 10, 15 more guards. It should have been a whole thing that would have taken multiple sessions to plan out. And it just kind of got rushed through. Mainly because I was anticipating them just stopping their plan and following up on the serial killer plot line thing. But they did not. They continued with their original plan. And also, I suppose there just shouldn't be plot lines. I think this system, as in the homebrewed version of 5th edition we're using, as well as the setting, just works better if there isn't a plot line, more so just the party traveling from place to place and encountering monsters and fighting them and finding cool locations and extracting treasure from locations and all that kind of stuff. The strengths are in the OSR styling, and the idea of there being this big plot thing kind of ruins the scope because it kind of pushes everything to the side, if that makes sense. When you have a plot, it creates a timeline, and for most of the adventure, the party is going to be further away from the end than they are close to it, if that makes any sense. It probably doesn't, but it makes sense to me. In other words, don't have any big grand schemes that you anticipate the party's actions in, because you don't know how they're going to behave or how their actions are going to affect the world around them, and it's just going to be too much of a gray area of possibilities to efficiently plan out anything. And with that note, I want to talk a little bit about the new characters, since the other ones are kind of dead technically, because he's going to be not taking his subclass yet. Brogan, Mike's character, is just going to get reworked to be more of a wisdom-focused character than a charisma one. So his spells, when he gets them again, are going to be a little bit better, and he's going to be a lot more focused, and hopefully more so monster hunter stylings instead of thief styling, which I think suits the ranger better. And I think Mike will just enjoy that type of character more. Usopp will be playing a wizard. His original idea was that there was a wizard who started doing magic and was kicked out of the house because magic is dangerous and shunned in this society, in this setting. And now he wants to travel around and convince people that magic isn't as dangerous as they think it is, or as evil as they think it is. And the big problem with that is, in this setting, magic is very, very, very dangerous, and the people who practice it are also very, very dangerous. And most of them are evil because you can't just screw around with very dangerous things unless you are willingly negligent or outright malicious. Either way, wizards, people you don't want to associate with. So my pitch was that there was a wizard near the village that was trying to teach him magic, more so for the purposes of just getting an assistant to go do his stuff. And he was run out, and then he left shortly after. And I think that works better because it gives him an NPC that he could be looking for, and it's a magical NPC, so it could be a resource. It keeps the general idea of the character the same, while also taking account the lore of the setting. I still have to keep an eye on it because, magic is dangerous, and he's playing a magical character who wants to be more so public with his magic, and that gives me a chance of introducing my witch hunter character idea, where he is a guy who will hunt the party down if they do too much magic that is too big too quickly, and I have a cool backstory for him involving a fairy and a chair, and I don't like giving NPCs levels because that's kind of dumb, but I do like giving them class features, so he's probably gonna be based on a barbarian, just because I like the idea of this witch hunter who is very calm, cool, and collected, and articulate, and attentive, and wise, and almost like a rogue. But the second, magic comes out and he needs to fight, he's immediately going full on violence. Because if you see a witch, you don't have time to be all sneaky and have this big grand plan. You gotta just run and kill them as quickly as possible. And then there's Byozuma's character, who there were some issues, and a lot of it comes down to the fact that this is not the kind of game where you write a big complicated backstory for, and Bo really likes these big complicated backstories. Your guy might live to be 3 or 4 levels in, so you shouldn't really have a dozen named NPCs in your character's backstory. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but there's an actual narrative he sent me, and I tried reading it. It's mainly me just having terrible reading comprehension. Bo had some details in the character's backstory that may not really work. This character has some references to the Raven Queen as the character itself, which I have a problem with because there's only one god in the setting that's really associated with ravens, and it's the last god Bo's character served. Kind of. Dallason's Patreon was Coddard, who I've talked about numerous times in this video and the previous one, but he's a miserable character who does everything in his power to just screw with and ruin the lives of people who he gives power to. If you are a warlock of Coddard, it is because you pissed him off by existing, and now you have to deal with it. Also, in this setting, humans don't become higher beings. A person doesn't die and become a demon or an angel or whatever. It's more so traditional Jewish, Christian, Islamic theology where you have like a soul that goes somewhere, but it doesn't become something else. And on top of that, I don't like there being a lot of prophecy for characters because they're gonna make a big deal about, oh, this is the second coming of so-and-so, and then he gets stabbed to death by bugbears in a cave. Well, there goes your prophecy. And like, yeah, there's this whole thing with prophecy in media becoming more of like a means of subversion than an actual thing, which is lame. Kinda. I don't know. But yeah, his character is going to be a druid with the ogre subrace. I've talked about it before, but in this setting, there are humans, and then there are two subvariants of halfling and ogre. They are the basically deformities that reoccur, because I watched that one Warhammer short, and I really liked the idea of ogrins, so I just plopped them into my game. Like, I took the Skaven and plopped them in as the kobolds. Because if you steal one idea, it is plagiarism. If you steal a bunch of ideas from a bunch of different people, that is called research. There was another druid in the setting that was played by Yann in one of the one-shots. Involved them going into a swamp and fighting a witch and saving a kid. And Bo wanted to tie this new character into that character, where the tribe or pagan group, the druidic circle, whatever you want to call it. I haven't come up with a good name for them. Basically the Outlanders or the Wildlings who worship the Fae and have druids. Basically that little community was like super strict, where like, I think the example was like you'll be put to death for cutting down the wrong tree or something. And that's not how Yann played that character. His entire purpose for being there was, hey, there's like a monster running around and it's kind of my duty to make sure that doesn't affect the human world, because if you want a creature that is violent towards all that disturb nature, that's the Fae. That's the fairies and the elves and shit. Things that will stab you to death for stepping on a flower. I think the example we gave was, yeah, you piss off an elf, or you step on a flower, or you step on the wrong bug, and a fairy will come and blind you and all of your children for every generation, will be born blind. And the druids come in and says, okay, well, hold on, let's work this out. Let's make sure that we resolve this in a way that doesn't end with people being crippled or tortured forever, and it doesn't end with the humans saying, oh, there's a monster in the woods that blinded an entire family forever, well, we're just gonna go kill them. And the humans pick up their pitchforks and torches and burn down the forest, and then the elf that's in there is dead because they have a forest to live in. It's just gone. Because humans, when they're pissed off, can kill anything, and the druid's role is to make sure that the humans don't destroy the ecosystem so that they're screwed, and they're also going to make sure that the Fae don't screw with humans enough that the humans get pissed off and kill them all. There is a degree of veneration to the Fae, but most of what the druids do is placation, and that part of the backstory was kind of changed because it's way too, like, violent. Like, the world is cruel, the people shouldn't have to be. And people only really act like assholes in this setting if they have a reason to. The reason the girl became a little serial killer was because her parents died and she had no community to support her. She had money, she had wealth, she had material, she was warm and had food, but people didn't talk to her. She'd go days without real human connection, and that messes with you. Or the Earl of Chandler's Cove. He's a paranoid wreck who has shut himself in and neglected his duties of protecting his people. Why? Well, because he's basically the one H.P. Lovecraft character, where for the past 100 years, a wizard who's been living in his walls systematically kills off his lineage when they turn 30. And he's 29, so he's gonna die any day now. And he doesn't have an heir, so his entire lineage is screwed. And ownership of the county is gonna go to a cousin who's probably never lived there before and has no real connection to people there. Everyone has a very specific reason for behaving the way they do. Also, I think his character had antlers, which another character in the urban fantasy game had antlers too. And that one was weird because it's like an urban fantasy game and his character was someone who came from fantasy times, which I worked in, and it was resolved, I guess, but it was really out of place. And if you look different in this setting, people are gonna be suspicious of you and treat you like a pariah. The party could either kill monsters or be monsters. There's no real middle ground. You can't be both. Anyway, getting into future plans, I'm probably gonna have Gabriel leave and then run into Mike's new ranger and Bo's new character outside of the city. And then Usopp is actually not gonna be playing next session. He can't make it, and we're just gonna introduce him later, probably when they get closer to Lockhart. Actually, reading through Bo's character's backstory, there might be some tie to Lockhart. I think he gave her the noble background, which, if he's going for a druidic vibe, that doesn't really work because the druids don't have land. They live on other people's land, or they live on unclaimed land because they're migratory. And on top of that, the local governments are not going to respect the house of individuals who worship gods that are not only not respected by the majority of people, but are almost outwardly antagonistic. Like, Gabriel can point to Thone and say, "This is my god. His role in society is to protect those who are dead, and I offer my services to him because I think that is a noble goal, and I want to do that as well." And then you have druids say, "Here's this fairy that will eat your babies if you cut down too many trees, and my purpose is to make sure you don't piss it off enough, and to make sure it doesn't eat too many babies so that you go and kill it." And also, it doesn't really have a role in the world, it just kind of existed here before, so we just gotta deal with it. Yeah, fairies in this setting are almost like radon gas. You don't really understand how it works, but if you screw around with it, it's probably gonna give you cancer, or some other horrible, horrible ailment. As for monsters and other fighting things, depending on where they meet up, I might have them have to fight an elf or fight a ghoul. So the two reasons I want to do that is because, one, when an elf dies, you can cut out its heart, and that heart can be used to make a health potion. That's one of the few ways you can make a health potion in this setting, is by killing an elf. Also, if an elf dies and you wait too long to get at it, they don't really decompose, but their bodies stick around, but that spirit is somewhere, and if you disturb the dead body of an elf, that's how you get a banshee. And nobody wants to fight something that could kill you if you fail a wisdom check. And I want them to fight a ghoul because there's that ring of advantage on death saves that I said Yann was gonna get, and I like the idea of them stealing it from a ghoul, and the ghoul hunts them down, attacks them, and then runs away again. Basically like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, where it thinks that the party stole something from it, and so is gonna keep hunting them down until it gets it back. The difference being that this is just a monster that can't really be redeemed, and it's never gonna become friendly to the party. It's just a recurring antagonist, and also the ring isn't cursed. It's just a ring that gives advantage on death saves. Also, another thing I should add is that when a character dies, they do lose some XP, but it's half until their next level. So, for example, the 3 characters that got retired, they were level 2, so the new characters will be level 1, but because there is 300 XP points to level 3, then they're gonna have 150 XP. And if they die again, then they're not gonna go down even further. It's just when you die, the next character and the characters after are gonna be half of it until you progress to the next level. So you're losing some progress, but not a whole lot. Now, I probably have some more things to say but I can't think of them right now. And also, this recording has gone on for 30 more minutes than I wanted it to. So I have to still cut that down and then upload it because I've spent like 2 weeks on this thing when I should only have spent a couple days. But there was a lot of stuff, and it's also 2 sessions together. So we're done. I'm done with this project right now. I have to run my game tomorrow. That's how long I've taken on this thing. So we're done. I still have no idea how to close these out. If you made it this far, don't put chariots in the comment section. Only put 1 chariots. Only 1. Okay, so yeah, thanks for watching and or listening. I apologize for the poor quality. It's not gonna get any better.